Once I've got confirmation. Okie doke, recording has started. So without further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Ollie Bowden and James Wardropper from Ordnance Survey, who will be talking about the PGSA and how it can benefit your organisation. Ollie, it's over to you.
Cool, let's make a start then. Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well. First off, thanks to Suzanne and Rob for inviting us to speak today. It's much appreciated, always happy to get out in front of customers and tell them a bit about OS and what we do. A quick introduction, I'm Ollie Bowden and I'm presenting with my colleague James Wardropper today. We're both consultants in the Consultancy and Technical Services team, which has been abbreviated to the CATS team because Consultancy and Technical Services is too hard to say. I almost couldn't say it then myself. It's our job to help you get the most out of OS data, so to better understand it, to better utilize it, or if we're going to use business speak, to get the most value out of it. And hopefully that presentation will go some way to doing that today. Next slide, please. So some of you may have heard about some of the things that we're going to talk about today on previous presentations that we've done, such as the ins and outs of the PSGA, for example. So if we do reiterate any content you've already heard, please bear with us and we'll get on to hopefully what you'll find more interesting things later on, such as the National Geographic Database. But what we're going to try and do is give an overview of the PSGA, so that will be the data, the consultancy and support that you'll get. We'll talk a bit about mapping for emergencies, and then we'll go on to the National Geographic Database, which is the new vehicle through which we're delivering our products. And I've also added on a section to talk about Power BI and OS data a little bit at the end, because I'm hoping that you'll find that a bit interesting. But as I said, the intention is to give you an overview of OS data and what we can offer you as consultants as well. And next slide, please. So we have a core group of us within Wales, which is the Welsh team. So yeah, if you could hop to that slide. There's 4 of us at the moment, which is James and I as technical relationship consultants, Danny Hyam, who's our manager and also helps to look after Wales, and Pam Whittam, the strategic development manager. You may have spoken to some of us in the past or heard us talk on different presentations. But I would say if any of you have any questions, or at the end of this presentation, if you want to speak to anybody about OS data or OS, feel free to reach out to any of us and we'd be absolutely happy to help. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pass over to James now to give a bit of an overview of what the PSGA is.
Good morning, everybody. As Ollie said, that we cover Wales predominantly, and we provide sort of technical support with our customers, for our customers across Wales. So what I'm going to cover this morning is what is the PSGA. So firstly, PSGA stands for the Public Sector Geospatial Agreement. It's between Ordnance Survey and the Geospatial Commission, which sits within the Cabinet Office. And it provides a whole suite of data, ways to access our data and ways to share our data. And it's prepaid up front. So with Welsh Government coordinating the PSGA within Wales, it is prepaid. So this is for local authorities, emergency services, and government organisations across Wales. We have a whole raft of different data, and I will cover some of these things in the presentation. Next slide, please. So just before I dive into the data and what is available, the other key thing just to remember is that we are here to help. If you've got any queries, any questions, want any advice, do ask Ollie or myself, and we're here to help you. So if you think, well, actually, I want to do this with the data, or I'm not sure about what to use, do ask us. So this slide really covers the whole raft of different types of data, really from address data to map data, going from really small scale to large scale data, to our more detailed products, our vector products. So we have 2 types of product. We have 2 types of main products. We have vector products and raster. The way to think of a raster product is like a scanned image. If you zoom in on a raster product, it becomes pixelated. with raster products, what you see is what you get. It doesn't have any intelligence behind it. It's a picture. With vector data, it's made up of individual points or lines or shapes or objects, which I would call polygons. And if you click on it, it's intelligent data. It's got attribution behind it. You can analyze it. You can also change the look and feel of it. So, well, actually, I only want these features. I want to color it this way, or I want to color it the standard way. Ordnance Survey colors it, so it's much more flexible. So we have a whole raft of detailed products like the OS master map topography layer, which goes down to individual building outline, and that really includes anything you can trip over, like a curb line, fence, buildings, things like that, and that's really detailed. We have routing products, so you can create routing networks along roads, along paths in urban areas. We have building height data as well. We have sites in it as well. With sites, I mean things like hospitals, schools, things like that within the airports. Green space. And with our data, it's sort of split into two. Under the PSJ, you're able to access all these products on the slide. We also have OS open data. So if you're not a member of the PSJ, you can still use some of our products like the OS open green space, OS open listed identifiers. There are a raft of products, OS code point. So there are open data products which you can use as well. And finally, with this slide, I really want to go down to the bottom. We have a whole raft of APIs and web services, which I'll cover in more detail. Next slide, please. So this slide really covers the APIs available to the public sector. We also have APIs available, open APIs as well. So, for example, I've signed up with my own personal email account, and I've got access to some of the free APIs. We've got the OS Features API, so that's really the OS Master Map suite of products. So that's sites, that's the topography layer, that's our detailed data, that's our vector data, and it's called a web WFS. That's a web feature service. That's serving vector data over the internet. We have the OS Vector Tile API, which is great for building interactive maps. Again, you can change the color, you can pan, you can rotate, you can extrude buildings on it, and you can change the styling as well. We have the OS Maps API, which is a web map tile service, and what that is, it's streaming predominant what is really a raster data. It's backdrop mapping, but it goes from small scale, let's say the whole of Wales, right down to individual property level for data for users, for people who are licensed under the PSGA. We have the OS Downloads API. With this API, you can streamline how you actually receive our products. So you could set up a system, and you could automatically download the products you actually want, the area of coverage you want on a regular basis. So you don't have to request it. You could automatically query the data, see whether there's an update, and then download that to your organization. You have the OS Places API, and this is based on addressing, on the address-based products. And there are two addresses within it. One is the Royal Mail address, and the other address is the local authority address. And we have both addresses within that. And we've got a find function. You can type in an address, let's say Beechwood Salisbury Road, and it would find it, or you could use a postcode search. There's boundary box searches as well. And the beauty with that is you're not having to hold the data, you're querying against a web service. And we've got, for example, ambulance services are using that. The Home Office are using it in most of the police databases. The DVLA are using it. HMRC are using that. We have OS linked identifiers, which links common identifiers between different products. We have the OS names API as well. Next slide, please. And the key thing is we have all this data, we have all these services, but we, as I said before, we are here to help you get up and running with the data, work out what is useful. We can do proof of concept, so you can say, well, actually, we're thinking of doing X, Y, and Z with it. And in the past, we've taken data from customers, we've mapped it spatially, and we've shown how organisations could actually get business benefit and improve their services from the use of Ordnance Survey data. And this technical support is included within the PSGA. It is not a paid-for service; it is free. So it really goes to, we've got a number of different levels. It's really from getting started with our data. So what product should I actually use? And I'd really advise you to talk to us if you're not sure of what product you actually want to use. The worst thing is downloading everything and getting completely swamped with data. Do come and talk to us. So that's the sort of entry level. We've got advice, we can advise you on using OS data and services, what's the most appropriate one. We can help you maximize the value of geospatial data. You might already be using it, but you might have other ideas and you might want some advice and some help with that. The next level, we call this a sort of card opportunity, and this is embedding technical experts within organisations. So we had somebody who was embedded within Welsh Gov. We've had people, I was embedded within the Joint Biosecurity Centre doing all things COVID 2 years ago within the Cabinet Office. We had people embedded within the Home Office. And that's really working within your organisation to help you with the geospatial element. One example which is quite current is the Home Office. We had somebody in the Home Office, and they have worked with the Home Office to set up a central store of geospatial data with procedures to maintain that data, so that that data can be stored once within the Home Office and then used across the Home Office. And finally, we have scientific advice where we advise government bodies on geospatial as well. Next slide, please. The next thing I want to cover is mapping for emergencies. So this is in case you there is an emergency and you are unable to cope with that emergency. You need actual additional support or data. And the key element with mapping for emergencies is that the way to access it is to call this number. And this isn't for day-to-day stuff, this is an emergency. And we have a team who are on call 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, who are there to help you in case of an emergency. So with COVID, we provided a lot of support for different organisations. In some cases, we built very quickly web solutions for organisations. Another example was 2019. You might remember the dam, the Toddbrook Reservoir dam nearly burst. I was actually out on Saturday. I had my mobile went, and I spent 2 days at my dining room table supporting the local authorities, working out what properties could be flooded for that emergency. And this is primarily aimed at Category 1 and Category 2 responders under Civil Contingencies Act 2004. And with this service, we're not worried about whether you're licensed for data. So if you need data which isn't covered by the Public Sector Geospatial Agreement, the PSGA, we aren't worried about that. We'll supply you anything you actually need in an emergency. And just to reiterate, the way to get hold of us is to call the number there on the screen. Next slide, I think. So I'll hand over to Ollie, who will talk to you about the National Geographic Database.
Yeah, so what James just covered is kind of what you can think of as the traditional suite of OS data. So when you think of OS data, that is the kind of thing like address space and OS master map topography layer. The National Geographic Database is the new data offering and something that's just been launched in the format of the new Features API, that's the OS NGD Features API, and Select and Build, which we'll go into a bit more detail on later on. But first, I'll just talk a little bit about what NGD is itself. Next slide, please. So the tagline for NGD is it's the database that contains all the authoritative data that describes the geography of Great Britain. Essentially, this was the database that has been sitting in the background behind our existing products for quite a long time that we're now opening up to give you access to. To illustrate this a little bit better, if you think about how you currently take data, that's through existing products and services that are kind of preset in how they're given to you. So address space and master map, maybe places API, but that's changing a bit with NGD. Next slide, please. Yeah, so with the NGD, rather than accessing data through pre-existing products, you get access to the data from a single location, which is the National Geographic Database. The advantages of this are improved data structure, better data currency, and improved metadata, which I'll go into a bit more detail on later on. But to steal an analogy that I got from Danny Hyam, someone in our team, who's really into Lego. And if anybody knows our team, they'll know that most of us are into Lego. Not James or I, strangely enough, but most of the rest of the team. If you think of a Lego store, inside the Lego store, there are the preset boxes of Lego. So the Millennium Falcon, for example, that might be OS master map topography layer, but you'll also have the pick a brick wall where you can take whatever you want and build whatever you want. That's going to be NGD. So to draw an actual real world analogy, rather than downloading OS master map topography layer and building height attribute layer and spending time trying to join all these up and query it, you would just download building heights and building footprints directly from National Geographic Database, and James will show you how to do that a bit later on. One thing I do want to highlight is there aren't any plans anytime soon to withdraw existing products. The data isn't quite, I would say, isn't mature enough or anywhere near mature enough to replace these products that have been around for a very, very long time. So this really is a new offering in addition to the existing products that we offer. Next slide, please. So the data is broken down into themes, collections, feature types, and then the features within there. Those particular themes were on a previous slide, but I'll also bring them up again a bit later on. Some examples are land, building, transport, you know, these big overarching kinds of data sets that kind of fit into these categories. It's then broken down again into collections. So for transport, you would have a transport network, transport features, and RAMI. That's routing and asset management information. It's then broken down again by feature type into rail, road, routing hazards, paths, etc. And then you have the features within there. So the intention behind this is to allow you to really dig down into the data and ask for exactly what you want. So rather than downloading huge amounts of data for a specific product and then having to process it to get what you want out of that product, you can just ask for exactly what you want right off the bat. Next slide, please. So how do you access the NGD? The good news is it's through the OS Data Hub still, where you access your data currently, so there's no need to create a new login or a new password or anything like that. You'll just go straight onto the Data Hub and you'll be able to access it through there. There's two ways which you can access it at the moment. That's through the new APIs, currently OS Features API, NGD Features API, which has been launched. And in the future, there'll be Tiles API, which will be similar to the Vector Tiles service API that we currently have. And the other way is through Select and Build, which lets you drill down into the data and pull back exactly what you want at filtering at attribute level or however else you want to. James will go into a bit more detail on that later, but I would say just take a look and have a play. And if you have any questions, come back to us. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more on Select and Build. as you can see there, it's basically what you can think of it as, or the way I see it is, it's similar to the current download service on Data Hub, but more improved and specific to NGD. So it's quite intuitive. You can filter down into exactly what you want and pull back anything from the National Geographic Database. As I said, James is going to talk about this a bit more, so to avoid stepping on his toes, we'll go to the next slide. One of the main benefits, I think, of NGD is an improved documentation platform. So a lot of documentation already exists on the Data Hub, and you may have seen it already, but with NGD, they've really revamped it. And I think it's one of the main benefits of the new product release. There's loads of stuff on there. There's getting started guides, tutorials, style sheets, code examples, FAQs, and a really good page on Gitbooks as well, which kind of talks about everything that we're talking about in this presentation. So what is NGD? What are the benefits? How do you use it? And drills down into the themes, and also gets really technical if that's the kind of thing that you want to look at too. So there's examples of different kinds of coding, and it really, dives into the attributes of the features. So I find that's really useful, and I would recommend taking a look at it if you are at all confused about what NGD is or how to use it. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go into detail on everything on the slide, as there is quite a lot of text, but the headline from the slide is that we're going to be delivering iteratively from September, so previous month, 70 new data enhancements way into 2024. So some of the examples are on screen there, but the crux is NGD is just going to get better as time goes along. So some of the things that you might be interested in that's on screen there are single polygon outlines for building footprints. So rather than having multiple polygons, it's just a single building footprint. Roof attributions, so shape, aspect, etc. Land use data, floor levels and addressing, which is very useful for emergency services, and the Emergency Services Gazetteer, also known as the Vernacular Names Gazetteer. So some really cool stuff coming out in the future. It's worth keeping an eye out for. One thing that is worth mentioning is these data enhancements aren't going to be back engineered to existing products. So these really will be specific to NGD and set NGD apart as a new service offering. So for example, daily updates to NGD data won't be fed back into topography layer, for example, because they really are two separate things. Next slide, please. So what we have on here, apologies, you might have to tilt your head to be able to read the text, but it's how we fit them all on screen. It's just a visual representation of the different types of data that are within NGD. You'll see that geographically, it looks very similar to previous data sets, but the attribution is very different. It's a more rich, the data currency is improved, but hopefully that just gives you a flavor for the kind of data that you can pull out of the NGD if you wanted to. Next slide, please. So as I said, the intention is really to open up the data to you and give you more power in how you take the data and offer a kind of single location view of our data rather than having the pre-existing products. You probably will still use all the products that we have previously, the ones you're familiar with, and they definitely still have their place. But hopefully this gives you another way to extract value from our data and a bit more options in the kind of things that you want to do. So some of the benefits, for example, our data currency is massively improved. It's an up-to-daily update in some cases. I think for most of the themes, it's actually a daily supply now, which is really good. You get the ability to choose exactly what you want, which cuts down on processing and saves on storage. The data also comes in really friendly formats, so GeoPackage or CSV, the kind of things that you can plug directly into whatever software you're using. So QGIS, it works straight away with that. And a CSV, if you're using a PostGIS database, you can just plug that straight in. So there's no more, that kind of cumbersome or unwieldy data formats like GML. You just download it and it's good to go straight away. And all the data is centralized on Data Hub. So we really tried to make sure that everything was in a single place. So the documentation is there, the data's there, and hopefully that will make it a bit easier for everybody to use as well. Next slide, please. So I'm also just going to talk a little bit about the NGD Features API, which is, you can think of as version 2 of the original Features API and specific to NGD. So just go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is one of the two ways with which you can access the National Geographic Database. I really like it as a preference because I like working with APIs and I like using Python and I like using R, and this is a great option for that if you want to access the data in that way. So as I said, it's similar to the Features API, but for NGD data, you can request the data as it's needed rather than having to download it. It uses OGC API standards, which is the open kind of gold standard for APIs at the moment. So that will just mean that as time goes on, support for the API from different software providers will just improve. More and more places will take it, and it will be easier to use. It also uses the same data structure that the NGD data uses, which is at the bottom. Again, the intention behind this is to make the data easy to kind of parse apart and query, which is really helpful, I find. Next slide, please. One of the things I would quickly caveat before I move on is there are throttle limits to the API, so you can only request 100 features in a transaction, which means the intention behind the API is really to explore specific features or feature types or small areas of data. It's really not designed to make, say, a full scalable map of GB or to bring back huge errors, because you'll just use your transactions up really quickly. And while the API is obviously free under the PSGA, that might mean that your API will be paused for a short amount of time and you won't be able to get the data that you need. So I would just be mindful of that when using it. But going into how you actually do use it, there's a bunch of different ways, and it's really dependent on the software you use, what you're comfortable with, and what you're trying to do. So for example, like I said, I like using it in Python or R. It's really, really good for analysis in that sense. But you can also use it in QGIS, which I do a lot too. You can even use it in FME to spit out certain blocks of features and then put those into a GIS software. So it's really dependent on what you want to do. The querying that it uses is CQL querying too, not to be confused with SQL querying. This is kind of it's meant to be an intuitive, well, it is an intuitive way of querying the data. There's documentation examples of this on the Data Hub, but it makes it very simple to ask for specific features and put in specific parameters and get that data back. And the way you access it, as with the previous APIs and any other APIs, you just go to the Data Hub, you get your API key, and you'll have a URL like the one on screen there. Pop in, but the key will be there, and you can just pop that into whatever GIS software you use or whatever coding software, and start to have a play around with it. So it's quite intuitive. Next slide, please. Yeah. So to highlight again, there's tons of documentation online for NGD now, and that extends to Features API too. There's getting started guides, tech specs, code examples, tutorials. The getting started guide on there is for QGIS currently, though more will come in the future. And the QGIS one is very comprehensive. I realize we're short on time, so I won't run through it as in a demo, but all the detail is on there on the Data Hub, and I'll also pop a link into the chat too, so you can go through and take a look for yourself. And of course, there's the Git book as well, which contains all this information and more. Next slide, please. So over to James to talk about select and build.
Okay, so I'm going to cover select and build. We can get on to the next slide, please. So this is a way to access the data. And the key thing with the PSGA is the OS Data Hub. The OS Data Hub is the way to access our data and our products. And with the OS Data Hub, you can download data. You can access the APIs. There's also an error reporting tool on the OS Data Hub. So if you come across an error in our data, you can select that as well. So what I'm going to cover now is, as I said, select and build, and this refers to the NGD data Ollie has actually covered. And once you're in the OS Data Hub, you can collect on the OS select and build, and it opens up a recipe. And recipes are selections of certain themes within NGD, and they could be one theme or multiple themes. So you could say, actually, what I want to create is the bespoke recipe. What I'm interested in are pylons, power cables, items like that, but I'm also interested in rivers and water catchment areas in case of flooding, and you could create a specific recipe for that, and then order data accordingly. But I'll go through that. Next slide, please. So once you've created the actual data package, you then begin to create the actual recipe. So on the right hand side, you can see you've got the individual themes. You've got administration structure. We've got buildings, and we've in this recipe we've actually selected administrative and statistical units, buildings, that's buildings features, building lines, and we're also interested in structures, but only certain parts of that structure. And as Ollie said, there are 9 themes, and under each theme is a series of collections such as building features or structures, and under each collection is a series of feature types such as compound structure, structure line, and structure point. And what you can do is you can select what you actually want. So with building heights, you could select building height, buildings within a certain height of sea level, for example, and then request those buildings. And the user can select data at the theme level, the collection level, or the feature type, and build a recipe. If we go on to the next slide, please. And as I briefly mentioned, what you can do is you can begin to filter. You can filter on attributes or numeric values. And on the right hand side here, we're looking at compound structures, where we want to search on the description. We've got an option of equals, not equals, in, not in, null or not null. Next slide, please. And depending on on the actual features, it depends on what you can actually select on. As I mentioned, you can select on the text. That could be catchment area, description, name, OS land cover, a restriction, for example, for transport, or you can select on the numerical values, such as fields including absolute, as mentioned, absolute height, the maximum height, the minimum height. So you've got a vast array of options. Next slide, please. And this slide really goes over the filtering and the text field. As I said, that was in this example, we're looking for, we are running a query against description, and we want to find something which is in that actual feature. So we've got description, description and in, and then we've got a type of bridge there. There's a vast array of options as well. Next slide, please. So this really goes on and covers the filtering of numerical fields. You've got text fields or numerical fields, and here we've got what you can actually select, and you can write down to between or not between as well within that, or greater than, or lesser than, or greater than, or equal to. So it's particularly flexible. Next slide, please. And once the recipes are actually created, you then give it a name. And then once you've created that recipe, you can then add a data package. A key thing with a recipe is once you've created a recipe, currently you cannot delete that recipe. And we're looking at actually changing that. And with once you've actually created that recipe, you can then add your actual data package. And I'll go on to the next slide, please. So with a data package, you can give the data package a name. You can draw a polygon for the area of interest or upload one. So for example, we've got the whole of Wales. It could be a local authority. We've got file formats. We've got two file formats. One is CSV. The other one is GeoPackage. And then you can also say, well, actually, I want a one-off snapshot. And with the NGD data, the key thing to note is going forward from when it was released last month, we will have historic data. So let's say in 5 years' time, you actually want data for now, you could roll back and actually order that. But that is only going forward from last month. And once you've the other point, key thing to note is with the data, you can only really request a complete resupply unless you request a national coverage, that's England, Scotland, and Wales, and you select CSV. You can only select full resupply, a full resupply of that data. But you can actually put that in, saying, well, actually, I want a full resupply of that data, and add that in as well. Next slide, please. So just as a summary with that, I've covered a lot of information, and what we would both be happy to do is, if you're interested in creating recipes or want more information on an NGD for your organisation, Ollie and I would be happy to come in and demonstrate that. It's quite hard to actually show that within a PowerPoint. It's much easier to demonstrate that, but currently we couldn't incorporate that within the app, but it's much easier to actually see a live demonstration of that. So we're happy to help, and do reach out and contact us. So I'll pass over to Ollie, who's going to cover Power BI NOAS data.
Yeah, as James said, it's a complicated topic. It's hard to summarize in a PowerPoint. We tried to squeeze a lot into the hour, so we're happy to talk about it more directly with you if that would help anybody. I realize it's getting close to 1, so I hope people are still awake. And at the end, for the last part of the presentation, I'm going to talk a little about a specific application of OS data, that is with Power BI. Next slide, please. So I know Power BI is used by a lot of different organizations. It's a great tool, but one thing I did find when I was playing with it is it's not the easiest to get OS data into Power BI in a meaningful way. So what we did is we looked into a few of the visualization tools that you can use and different ways that do work, and these will be improved as time goes on too. So the free APIs we found that work the best with Power BI is the Maps API. There's a few ways that you can use this, but this can act as backdrop mapping, which essentially is OS master map topography layer and a few other data sets at different zoom levels. And you can also make this interactive, so you can zoom in your Power BI mapping. It's really cool, it's very useful, and it's quite easy to use. I'll show you how to do that later. There's the VTS2, which uses the Mapbox visualizer. The vector tile API is very cool. It's interactive, it's customizable. You can even put things like 3D buildings on there, and you can pan around, not just zoom in and out. It's a very cool API, but it's a bit harder to get working. And the Places API, which is really easy to use. You just add data from the web and paste in your URL for Places, and you'll be able to bring back address-based data, and that will have X and Y along and lat, and you can plot the data in Power BI using that. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as I said, there are multiple ways to get it working. There's connectors for the VTS and the Maps API. The ones that we've been using is the Mapbox visual one for the Vector Tiles API and Icon Map for OS Maps API. There are a few little caveats about coordinate systems and things like that, but they're fairly straightforward to get working. And for the Places API, it's just very simple. You click on Get Data, say Get Data from Web, and the URL that you have for Places that might specify a postcode, for example, it will pull back that data and you can just plug that in with the X and Y, the long and lat. So that's quite a cool way of exploring the API that I wasn't aware of until quite recently, actually. And the fourth way is, of course, with R and Python. Something that I've been looking at recently is using R to bring in OS Maps API and make it interactive too. This is based off work that was done by Welsh Ambulance that is really cool, using R and Node.js to make a custom visual, and hopefully I'll be able to show that a bit later on. Next slide, please. So for Icon Map, if you wanted to get the OS Maps API, for example, you would go onto the screen where it shows your visuals. You would click Import a Visual. Actually, you would click Get More Visuals, apologies. And then you'll be able to select Icon Map and bring that in. Then when you click on that and add in some sample data, click on the visualization, you'll get the option to format the visual, which is a tab second to the right, I think. And in there, it's very simple. You just paste in the URL for the WMS that you would have got from Data Hub. So you can see in the bottom right there, that's the start of the URL. Give it a sensible name. And if there's data in your Power BI that has a spatial element, i.e. coordinates, then they will plot and the OS Maps API will be beneath that. So that's a really useful and cool way to make your visualizations in Power BI just look a bit better, a bit more interesting. So I definitely recommend taking a look at that. Next slide, please. So yeah, I just covered this, but you get the URL on Data Hub, specifically the ZXY URL. And I would also, it's the URL on screen there is British National Grid 27700, but I would choose the other one, 5. Forgotten it off the top of my head, but the WGS 1984, I would take that one instead, because that tends to be less temperamental with Power BI. And then you just copy that straight in and it should just work. And it will look as it is on screen there. Next slide, please. So for places, very straightforward. You would just go get data, go down to web, put in your chosen parameters. So for example, there, that's pulling back a specific postcode, and it has a minimum match rating of 0.1, which I believe is the default. You just paste that in, click OK, and it will pull back the results. Next slide, please. And then, yeah, you can either visualize it, or you can do whatever you want with it in terms of analysis and querying. So what that has done is it's taken the addresses from that postcode, it's looked at the address classification, and it's shown the types of addresses within that postcode. So terrace, detached, or semi-detached, or self-contained flats, and it's showing that in a pie chart. A very ugly pie chart, I might add. My Power BI skills aren't particularly great, but hopefully that gets the point across. I'm not sure if it's possible or not for me to share screen to visualize these, if we have time to do that. But if anybody is interested, I'll pop a screenshot of what they look like into the chat. And if there's any questions, then you can come to us later and we'll be able to explain it to you in more detail. Or if you have any trouble doing this, then feel free to reach out. We're absolutely happy to help. I'm more than happy to help. Next slide, please. So this was really cool. This is the work that Welsh Ambulance did using R to bring in OS Maps API. So this is quite an innovative piece of work. They used Leaflet and R script, and they were able to make a custom visualization that you can add that contains OS Maps API and also a customizable menu, interactive menu, which you can see in the bottom left, that allows you to switch between the different map styling. So right there, it's showing OSM, I believe, but underneath that, there's OS roads and there's light and there's leisure as well. So you can just flick between those. And it also changes the symbolization of the points there, depending on specific categories of data, which is also built within the R script. So this is also something, if anybody on the call is interested in doing something similar to this, or making a more complicated or interactive map using R or Leaflet in Power BI, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to help with that. Next slide, please. So yeah, this was for the Power BI demo, but I feel like it's probably best if we have some time for questions. I'm not sure as well on the logistics of sharing screens, so I think that might be it. and me and James are happy to take any questions that there might be.
Thank you ever so much, both. That was an awful lot of information to cover, so I'm very impressed that we did it in time. That was really, really good. There are no current questions. If anybody's got any questions, do put them in the chat. We can respond to them then. Alternatively, we have got 5 minutes, so if you want to see whether you can share your screen, then you can do a quick demo while we're waiting for questions up here. Again, I'm not sure of the logistics. It depends whether you've got the share.
I think I do. Let's give it a go.
Okay.
Does that work?
We can see, yeah.
Okay, yeah, great. So what I have here is Power BI on screen, and this is showing the OS Maps API using Icon Map. So it's fully interactive. You can zoom in and out, and as you zoom in, the map will rescale and show different kinds of data sets. So this is great for plotting points or polygons within Power BI. And the way you do this is you get the icon map visual, which I have on screen here. You put in your data, and then on the second tab, there's this section for WMS, and you can just pop that in. Really straightforward, really easy, and a great way to improve your visuals in Power BI. That is the same for this one as well, Mapbox. The difference with Mapbox is it's a bit more difficult to get in. You have to use the Mapbox visual tool here. Once you do have it in though, it's the same in that you can zoom in and out, but you can also pan around. And what some people do is, I mean, you can style this however you want. You can add in 3D buildings even, but just another way to bring the APIs in that's really useful. And the one that I was showing from Welsh Ambulance earlier, if this loads up, that's not a good sign, is it? Okay, it does work. Yeah, you can click through the different options for the different styles. You can change whether you want the points to be symbolized as markers or circles. I just thought this was really cool, and I didn't realize it was something you could do within Power BI. So very interesting piece of work. And if anybody needs help doing something similar to this, then feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to help.
Thank you very much. I think, Jodie, if we just put the last slide back on the screen. And there are no questions. So we've blown everybody's mind. I say we, that's a very royal we. Jodie, you're on the presenter view there now. Not that it matters because there's nothing else to see, but excellent. So yeah, just on that slide when we've shared the right one, there we go, thank you. Just a little bit more information as well about some of other information about the support we provide. There's some contact details there as well for anybody who wants to get in touch. So as Ollie and James both said, if you've got any questions after today or you want some support in terms of using the information, then by all means get in touch with them. Equally, if you want some kind of help and support from Data Cymru to do some of that stuff as well, then please feel free to drop us a line, and we have people here that can provide that level of support as well. There are no questions, so I'm going to say on that note then, thank you very much both for speaking with us today and for sharing all of this. Absolutely fascinating, and it's hopefully given some people some food for thought, especially potentially for those who are new to this data set. So thank you very much, and I will stop the recording.